The ground trembles violently under the rhythmic and terrifying pounding of 40,000 hooves on the grassy Hungarian plain. It is April in the year 1241, and the heavy air is thick with the scent of wet grass and imminent death. King Bela IV stands anxiously atop his fortified wagon camp, watching the distant horizon darken with an approaching storm that is not made of rain clouds, but of men and beasts. These are not the disorganized and savage barbarians the European knights expected to crush easily with their heavy iron armor and disciplined formations. Instead, they face a phantom army that moves with the fluidity of water and strikes with the precision of a lightning bolt. The survival of the Kingdom of Hungary, and perhaps the fate of all Christendom, hangs by a fragile thread on this fateful morning near the Sajo River. If the royal army falls here, there is essentially nothing standing between these relentless invaders and the rich cultural centers of Vienna, Paris, and Rome. The heavy cavalry of the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Order prepare their long lances, believing their thick steel plate will protect them from the primitive weapons of the nomads. They do not realize that the enemy they face has already dismantled empires far older and more powerful than their own, using a weapon that defies the military logic of the medieval world. This unstoppable force is the Mongol Tumen, a military unit of 10,000 horse archers bonded by blood loyalty and iron discipline. At the heart of this storm rides the Mongol warrior born in the harsh steppes of Central Asia, where survival is a daily battle against the elements. He is not merely a conscripted soldier, but a master of the composite bow capable of loosing arrows with lethal accuracy while galloping at full speed. His life is inseparable from his horse, and together they form a centaur-like entity that can cover hundreds of miles in days and vanish before the enemy can strike back. How did a scattered collection of warring tribes from the desolate plains of Mongolia transform into a unified war machine that shattered the greatest civilizations of the 13th century? What technological secrets and tactical innovations allowed these leather-clad nomads to humiliate the armored knights of Europe, the samurai of Japan, and the vast armies of China and Persia? Was it sheer numbers or savage brutality as their terrified enemies claimed, or was there a sophisticated genius behind the thundering hooves that the sedentary world failed to comprehend until it was too late to save themselves? The answer lies in the immediate aftermath of the battle, as the Hungarian lines collapse under a hail of armor-piercing arrows. The Mongols do not just defeat their enemy, they herd them like cattle into a killing zone, using smoke and noise to create absolute panic. As the European knights turn to flee, they find their escape routes cut off by light cavalry that seems to be everywhere at once. This was not a chaotic brawl, but a carefully orchestrated extermination, proving that the Mongol horse archers were the most disciplined and effective fighting force the world had ever seen. To understand this phenomenon, one must look back to the unforgiving landscape that forged the Mongol people and their unique way of war. The steppe is a vast ocean of grass stretching from the forests of Siberia to the deserts of Gobi, where temperatures plunge to bone-chilling lows and soar to blistering highs. In this environment, a man without a horse is as good as dead, and a tribe without unity is destined for extinction. The harshness of the land weeded out the weak and cultivated a culture of extreme resilience where children learned to ride before they could walk and to hunt before they could speak. The engine of the Mongol conquest was the Mongol horse, a small and stocky breed that looked unimpressive to the eyes of a Western knight riding a massive destrier. Yet these ponies possessed stamina that defied belief, capable of enduring extreme cold and foraging for food beneath the frozen snow. A Mongol warrior did not ride a single mount into a campaign, but brought a string of 5 or 6 horses, changing them regularly to keep them fresh. This allowed the Mongol armies to move at speeds that paralyzed their enemies, covering 60 miles a day when other armies struggled to march 10. While the horse provided mobility, the composite recurve bow provided the firepower that brought empires to their knees. Constructed from layers of hornwood and sinew, laminated together with fish glue, this weapon was a marvel of medieval engineering. It required immense strength to draw and stored vastly more energy than the simple wooden bows used by European archers. The recurve design allowed for a shorter bow that could be wielded easily from the saddle, without sacrificing power or range, allowing a rider to shoot in any direction, even backwards while retreating. The Mongol quiver was a toolkit of death containing various types of arrows designed for specific tactical situations on the battlefield. There were light arrows with small sharp points for long-range shooting, intended to harass the enemy and disrupt their formations from a distance. For close-quarters combat against armored opponents, they used heavy arrows with chisel-shaped tips capable of piercing mail and plate armor. Some arrows were even fitted with whistling heads that created a terrifying shriek as they flew through the air, used to signal commands or strike fear into the hearts of opposing horses. A crucial piece of technology that gave the Mongols an edge was the jade thumb ring, which protected the thumb during the release of the arrow. Unlike the Mediterranean draw used by Europeans, where 3 fingers pull the string, the Mongols used a thumb draw that allowed for a cleaner release and faster shooting. This technique, combined with the ability to keep multiple arrows in the hand, allowed a skilled archer to loose arrows in rapid succession. They could rain down a constant suppression of fire that forced enemies to raise their shields and halt their advance, leaving them vulnerable to flanking maneuvers. Training for war began in early childhood, as Mongol games and daily chores were designed to build the skills needed for the battlefield. Archery competitions and horse racing were not just pastimes, but essential examinations of a young warrior's potential and status. They learned to shoot while their horses had all 4 hooves off the ground, effectively floating in the air for a split second to minimize vibration. This level of synchronization between man and beast required a lifetime of practice and could not be replicated by hastily trained peasant levies or feudal knights. The most impressive training exercise was the Nurj, or the Great Hunt, which served as a dress rehearsal for complex military campaigns. Thousands of warriors would form a vast circle spanning many miles, enclosing all the wildlife within a designated area. Over the course of weeks, they would slowly tighten the circle, communicating via flags and riders, ensuring that no animal escaped the cordon. This required absolute obedience and coordination, teaching the commanders how to control large bodies of men over vast distances, and the soldiers how to maintain formation under pressure. Logistics, often the downfall of pre-modern armies, were handled with characteristic Mongol efficiency and adaptability. The warriors carried their own supplies, including dried curd and cured meat that could last for months without spoiling. They drank kumis made from fermented mare milk, which provided essential vitamins and calories on the move. In desperate times, they would even open a vein in their horse's neck to drink a small amount of blood for sustenance before sealing the wound, allowing them to survive where other armies would starve. For personal protection, the Mongol heavy cavalry wore armor made of overlapping leather scales hardened with lacquer and sometimes reinforced with iron plates. However, the light horse archers preferred speed over protection, often wearing heavy silk undershirts beneath their tunics. This silk shirt was a stroke of genius, because if an arrow pierced the body, the silk would not break but wrap around the arrowhead. This allowed the arrow to be removed cleanly by gently pulling on the silk cloth, preventing the barb from tearing more flesh and reducing the risk of fatal infection. The disparate tribes remained locked in cycles of petty warfare until the rise of Temujin, who would later be known to the world as Genghis Khan. He saw that the old ways of tribal loyalty were a weakness that kept the steppe people divided and vulnerable to the machinations of the Chinese empires to the south. Through a combination of charismatic leadership, ruthless elimination of rivals, and strategic marriages, he united the Mongols, the Merkits, the Tatars, and the Naimans under a single banner. He replaced tribal aristocracy with a meritocracy, where a man rose in rank based on his ability and loyalty rather than his lineage. Genghis Khan reorganized the entire society into a decimal system that prioritized military efficiency and absolute obedience to the chain of command. The smallest unit was the arban, consisting of 10 men who lived 8 and fought together like brothers, responsible for each other's conduct. 10 arbans formed a zun of 100 men. 10 zuns made a mingan of 1,000, and 10 mingans formed the fearsome tumen of 10,000. This structure allowed for rapid communication and complex maneuvers on the battlefield, as orders flowed down from the general to the individual soldier with seamless precision. Communication on the chaotic battlefield was maintained through a sophisticated system of visual and auditory signals. Commanders used black and white flags during the day and lanterns at night to direct the movement of troops without the need for voice commands. The whistling arrows mentioned earlier could signal a charge or a retreat, instantly cutting through the din of combat. This allowed the Mongol commanders to control their troops like a puppeteer controls a marionette, reacting to enemy movements faster than any opposing general could hope to match. Before any campaign began, the Mongols engaged in extensive intelligence gathering using spies and merchants to learn about the terrain and the political situation of their enemies. They knew the roads, the water sources, and the fortifications of a region long before the first horsemen crossed the border. This information allowed them to bypass strongholds, cut off supply lines, and strike where the enemy was weakest. They were masters of psychological warfare, spreading rumors of their vast numbers and cruelty to encourage cities to surrender without a fight. The first major test of this new war machine came against the Jin dynasty of northern China, a sedentary empire with vast resources and fortified cities. The Mongols initially struggled against the high walls and siege engines of the Chinese, but they were quick learners who adapted rapidly. They captured Chinese engineers and forced them to build catapults, trebuchets, and battering rams, combining steppe mobility with sedentary siege technology. This ability to absorb the strengths of their enemies became a hallmark of the Mongol conquests, allowing them to overcome obstacles that should have stopped a nomadic army. Following the consolidation of power in the east, Genghis Khan turned his eyes westward toward the Khwarezmian Empire of Persia. The conflict began not as a war of conquest, but as a diplomatic dispute after a Mongol trade caravan was seized and the envoys executed. The Mongol response was a campaign of total annihilation that would forever change the demographics of Central Asia. Genghis Khan unleashed his generals Jib and Subutai, who dismantled the Khwarezmian defenses with a multi-pronged attack that struck from directions the Shah deemed impossible to traverse. It was during this campaign that the tactical genius of Subutai, one of history's greatest generals, truly began to shine. While Genghis Khan besieged the major cities, Subutai led a reconnaissance force deep into the west, chasing the fleeing Shah. This expedition turned into a legendary raid where Subutai and Jib defeated the armies of Georgia and crossed the Caucasus Mountains into Russia. At the Battle of Kalka River in 1223, they encountered a coalition of Rus princes and Cuman warriors. The Battle of Kalka River perfectly demonstrated the signature tactic of the Mongol horse archers known as the feigned retreat. The Mongols engaged the Rus forces and then suddenly turned and fled, as if in a panic, drawing the confident European knights into a disorganized pursuit. For days the Rus chased the dust of the retreating Mongols, stretching their lines thin and exhausting their horses. When the moment was right, the Mongols wheeled around their fresh mounts, thundering into the tired enemy and surrounding them in a deadly trap. This tactic was devastatingly effective because it exploited the aggressive instincts and lack of discipline common in feudal European armies. The knights, eager for glory and plunder, would break formation to chase down what they thought was a beaten enemy. The Mongols practiced this maneuver until it was second nature, able to switch from a full gallop retreat to an offensive charge in seconds. They would fire backwards over the rumps of their horses, the famous Parthian shot picking off the leading pursuers before the main counter-attack began. After the death of Genghis Khan, his son Ojdai continued the expansion, and the Mongols returned to Europe in 1241 with a clear intent to conquer. The campaign was masterminded by Subutai, who coordinated a two-pronged invasion of Poland and Hungary, separated by hundreds of miles. This strategic division of forces prevented the European powers from aiding one another, ensuring that the Mongols would face isolated armies rather than a united front. The speed at which they moved through the snowy Carpathian Mountains caught the Europeans completely off guard. In Poland, the Mongol Northern Army met the forces of Duke Henry the Pious at the Battle of Legnica. Despite being outnumbered, the Mongols used smoke tactics and their mobile archery to confuse and separate the heavy cavalry from their infantry support. The result was a massacre where the head of Duke Henry was placed on a spear and paraded before the defenders of the frantic town. This victory eliminated the threat from the north, allowing the main Mongol force under Batu Khan and Subutai to focus on the prize of Hungary. This brings us back to the Battle of Mohi, where King Bela IV found himself encircled by the main Mongol host. Subutai had outmaneuvered the Hungarians by crossing the river at night, using stone throwers to clear the bridge defenders. The Mongol artillery pounded the Hungarian camp, while the horse archers circled endlessly, raining death upon the trapped soldiers. The Hungarians tried to break out, but were cut down in the marshes, creating a scene of horror that would be written about in chronicles for centuries. The aftermath of Mohi saw the Kingdom of Hungary depopulated and the way to Western Europe wide open. Panic spread as far as France and England, where prayers were said for deliverance from the fury of the Tartars. However, just as the Mongols prepared to push into Austria and Italy, a messenger arrived from the east with news that saved Christendom. The great Khan Ojde had died, and according to Mongol law, the princes and generals had to return to Mongolia to elect a new leader. The withdrawal of the Mongol armies from Europe remains one of the great what-if moments in history. They never returned with the same force, leaving Europe to rebuild, while the Mongols turned their attention to the Middle East and the Song dynasty of China. Under Hulagu Khan, another grandson of Genghis, the horse archers descended upon Baghdad, the cultural capital of the Islamic world. In 1258, the city fell, and the House of Wisdom was destroyed, marking the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The sack of Baghdad demonstrated that the Mongol war machine was not just a tool for open-field battles, but a force capable of crushing the most fortified cities on earth. The horse archers had evolved into a combined arms force, utilizing engineers, infantry, and artillery alongside their cavalry. Yet the core of their power remained the mobility and firepower of the mounted archer. No other army in history had successfully projected power across such a vast landmass from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. The establishment of the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, allowed for an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and technology between East and West. The trade routes of the Silk Road became safe for travel under the protection of the Mongol patrols. A merchant could travel from China to Europe with a gold plate on his head, without fear of bandits, as the story goes. This era saw the transfer of gunpowder printing and medical knowledge that would eventually help spark the Renaissance in Europe. However, the seeds of decline were sown within the very nature of the empire they created. As the Mongols settled in the conquered lands, they began to lose the hard edge of their steppe heritage. The comforts of city life and the administration of vast territories eroded the martial culture that had produced the invincible horse archers. Civil wars between the different khanates fractured the unity that Genghis Khan had fought so hard to build, turning cousin against cousin. Furthermore, the spread of gunpowder technology, which the Mongols had helped facilitate, eventually rendered the horse archer obsolete. The handgun and the cannon required less training than the composite bow and could penetrate armor with even greater ease. The sedentary civilizations could now field mass armies of musketeers that could stand their ground against the cavalry charges. The age of the nomad was slowly coming to an end, replaced by the age of gunpowder empires. Yet the legacy of the Mongol horse archers is undeniable and permanently etched into the genetic and cultural history of the world. They proved that a highly mobile and disciplined force could overcome superior numbers and heavy fortification through superior tactics and technology. They forced the world to connect, shrinking the globe and accelerating the exchange of civilization in a way that had never happened before. The terror they inspired was matched only by the scale of their achievements. Today, the thundering hooves of the Mongol two-men are silent, and the great composite bows hang in museums rather than on saddle hooks. The vast empire has dissolved into the sands of time, leaving behind ruins and legends. But for a brief and explosive century, the Mongol horse archers were the masters of the world, reshaping the destiny of continents with every arrow they loosed. They remain the ultimate example of how speed, discipline, and adaptability can conquer the immovable weight of tradition. As we look back at the history of warfare, few forces have struck such visceral fear into the hearts of their enemies or altered the political map so drastically. From the banks of the Yellow River to the gates of Vienna, the Mongol horse archer stands as a testament to human endurance and military genius. They were the cavalry that struck fear across continents, and in doing so, they forged the modern world in the fires of their conquest.